Do you feel like you're paying too much in taxes every year, or have a relationship with your current CPA where you only meet them once or just before tax time? Look, I want you to know that there is another solution to paying less in taxes and keeping more of your money. Valentino Advisors is a leading fractional CFO and CPA firm that specializes in advanced tax strategies for founders, athletes, and entrepreneurs. Valentino Advisors can help you navigate the complexity of business taxes and ensure that you're paying the least amount in tax possible. But this is far more than tax preparation. This is strategy. This is really getting into the data-driven decisions that your business needs to make in order to develop a long-term strategy that aligns for your business and personal goals. Whether you're looking to minimize tax liability, maximize your deductions, or plan for your financial future, Valentino Advisors has the expertise and experience to help you get there. Do not wait until tax season. Work with professionals today. Contact Valentino Advisors to schedule a consultation. The difference between being an imposter, feeling imposter syndrome, and being a fraud is between intention and reality. It's when you actually have skills and abilities in a specific area, but still feel inadequate or like a fraud. Welcome to Generation Wealth. I'm Candy Valentino, and I've been building businesses and generating wealth before I could legally order a drink. For more than 2 decades, I've built, scaled, acquired, and exited businesses, all while investing in real estate and building financial freedom. Now I want to help you expand your wealth and give you the proven roadmap to implement today. It doesn't matter if you're a part of Generation X, Generation Y, or Gen Z. It is time to join Generation Wealth. Now let's get started. Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in. I just wanted to talk a little bit about, this is maybe not necessarily wealth or business related, although I do feel that it hits a lot of high achieving individuals. And I feel like there's a lot of talk out there about it, but they're only telling part of it. And that is the difference between imposter syndrome and being a fraud. And I feel like a lot of people are talking about that you're not an imposter and it's just imposter syndrome, but they're not actually qualifying it to see if perhaps somebody is a fraud, because let's be real, there are a lot of those in the world, as well as I would say even more so in the online space than I've ever seen. And so I want to break down the difference to see if maybe you're struggling with something, how to get the facts of whether you're a fraud or not. And I would assume that you're not, and that you're probably just dealing with some sort of imposter syndrome. So I want to share a little bit about the history of it. Also, what you can do if you feel that it creeps up, right? Because it's not just about the information, it's what we do with the information that matters. So people with imposter syndrome overall, it's just basically a doubt of their own achievements and their ability. And it's all because of fear. Sometimes fear that they're a fraud, fear that they're a failure, fear that they're not successful enough to do this next thing. And it can really affect anyone, regardless of the job, position, social status, but it really affects high achieving individuals more than ever, which if you think about it, like how crazy is that it actually affects people that have achieved things as opposed to those who haven't. And psychologists first found this syndrome and kind of described it in the 1970s, the late 1970s. And although sometimes people only experience symptoms of this for like a short period of time or a limited time, there are others that experience it lifelong. So let's break down what imposter syndrome is by definition. It's a psychological pattern where individuals doubt their accomplishments and have a persistent internalized fear of being exposed as a fraud. It's not actually being fraud or being a fraud, but the feeling like one despite evidence of competence. Now, let's look at the flip side of this. Fraud, or being a fraud, on the other hand, is wrongful or criminal deception intended to result in some sort of financial or personal gain. It's a person or a thing intended to deceive others, whether intentionally or accidentally because of the ways they're positioning something. And it's typically by unjustifiably claiming or being accredited with some sort of accomplishment or qualities that are not legit. Being a fraud is deliberate or unintentional deception. It's claiming skills or qualifications or an experience that someone doesn't actually possess. Dr. Pauline Rose Clance and Dr. Suzanne Imes first identified this, like I said, in the late 70s, and they noticed that it's particularly common among high-achieving women. Although now we understand in 2023 that it affects all people regardless of age, race, gender, or profession. The key difference between imposter syndrome and being a fraud lies in intention and reality. I'm going to say that again. The difference between being an imposter, feeling imposter syndrome, and being a fraud is between intention and reality. Imposter syndrome is your perception. It's not reality. It's when you actually have skills and abilities in a specific area, but still feel inadequate or like a fraud. This typically comes from some sort of self-deception where the perception of reality or of yourself doesn't align with the reality of your achievements and your capabilities. Now, being a fraud, on the other hand, is a reality. It's not your perception. It's about genuinely not having abilities, not having qualifications or experience that you claim to have, and intentionally deceiving others about it. It's important to understand the difference because they require a different approach to address. Imposter syndrome is going to call more for self-compassion and understanding and changing your perception in order to align with reality. But on the other hand, dealing with a fraud involves addressing and calling out ethical issues with honesty and transparency. Dr. Valerie Young did a lot of research on this topic, and she discovered that there are 5 types of imposter syndrome. There's one, the perfectionist. This is the type that involves believing that, unless you're absolutely perfect, you could have done better, you could do better, and that you're an imposter because you're not perfect and you're not as good as maybe others think you are. The second imposter type is the expert. The expert feels like an imposter because they don't know everything there is to know about a particular subject or topic, or they haven't mastered every step in a single process. And because there's more for them to learn, they don't feel as if they've reached that rank of being an expert. And I can tell you personally, just sharing honestly, I felt this along the way. I mean, when I came on the scene from behind the scenes building businesses for more than 2 decades and started talking about business and wealth, immediately my mind was like, well, I'm not Warren Buffett and I'm not Elon Musk. And I'm not all of these people that have done far greater, bigger things than me. So should I really be talking about it? And there was a lot of things that I had to balance and address in my own mind in order to just share the knowledge that I have, even though there are other people out there that have achieved far more greater, more significant things than I have. Being the expert doesn't mean you know everything. It just means that you know something about a particular subject or topic and that you've at least mastered some parts of the process. It doesn't mean that you have to know everything or the most in order to share, because let's be real, not everybody wants to be or thinks that they have the ability to be Elon Musk or Warren Buffett or want that type of lifestyle. So there are different levels of expertise and skills and mastery. And I think it's important that if you struggle with one of those, to understand the reality of what you have done, what you do know, what experiences that you've had to this point, and how you can help other people achieve some of the things that you've done. The third type of imposter syndrome is the natural genius. In this type of imposter syndrome, you may feel like a fraud simply because you don't believe that you're naturally intelligent or that you're the smartest person in the room. Maybe you don't get something right the very first time, or it takes you longer to master something, so you feel like an imposter while you're learning. The fourth is the soloist. This could be someone that feels like an imposter because they've had to ask for help to reach a certain level of success or status. And maybe you feel because you didn't get there on your own, or you had help in some way, that you question your competence or abilities. And then the fifth, the last, is the super person. This type of imposter syndrome involves believing that you must be the hardest worker in the room, that you must reach the highest levels of any achievement possible. And if you don't, you're a fraud. You can see how there are issues with each of these, and maybe there's one that you relate to. And although there's no specific treatment for imposter syndrome, you can get help if you have concerns, if this impacts your life in some way. So here's a few tips, a few steps on how that you can manage or overcome a sense of inadequacy related to imposter syndrome. First, talk about it. Sharing your feelings honestly, whether it's a trusted friend or colleague or a therapist, making sure that you're sharing what is real, because oftentimes we think that our feelings are facts and they're not. I'm going to repeat that again. Your feelings are not facts. Sometimes we think that we don't have competence or skills or ability in something, and we do. And so that's the thing, that maybe you want to talk to a trusted source in some way or open up to a mental health professional in order for you to process those feelings and really get an opportunity to tackle any underlying issue. Second, be aware of the symptoms. Knowing what imposter syndrome is, why it happens, and to understand the symptoms when they arise will help you develop strategies on how to overcome doubts. And look, accept that perfectionism is not possible. It's good to have a healthy self-esteem and a self-worth, but a person needs to accept strength and weaknesses, understanding that none of us is perfect and mistakes are an inevitable part of life. I mean, look, failure, mistakes, those are guaranteed. Growth through this journey of life is not. Learning to accept things that go wrong and develop resilience will give you a healthy state of not just mental health, but overall well-being. And I don't know what number we're on because I'm just rambling, but another one is to challenge your negative thoughts. Like, swap out your negative thoughts for positive ones. That is a massive key to overcoming this, because you think something doesn't make it reality. This is also the careful part you have to be about possibly people in your life that are frauds, because they may think that there is a sense of reality that's not true either. But the way that you can overcome imposter syndrome by swapping out those thoughts is celebrating your actual achievements. Going back through all of the things that you've gone through in your life, all of the things you overcame, all the challenges that were thrown your way, but didn't crush you, didn't destroy you. Recall all of those past successes. And like I always say, take out a sheet of paper, write them all down, keeping a track record of what you have accomplished in your life. And the positive things you have overcome is when you start to get those doubts in your mind, you pull out that sheet and you look at all of that. You take record of all of the things and remember who you actually are, who you really are. And that this next thing that you're trying to do, you actually have more experience, talent, and skills to overcome it than you did in all of those past things that you overcame. And in order to really start to think about it, ask yourself this question: what core beliefs do I hold about myself? Do I really need to be perfect for others to approve of me? And third, what have I done in my life? What is the reality of the things I have done, the skills that I have built, and the competencies that I have? What is real, so that you can move past these feelings and become comfortable confronting some of the deeply ingrained beliefs that we all hold about ourselves. And this exercise, I know, can be very difficult and hard. And you might not even realize that some of these things that we're talking about are things that you've never done. But I promise you, if you do this, if you really start to develop and look at what's real, you won't have imposter syndrome creep up as much. And you'll start trusting in your own abilities. It's important to access your abilities, to access what's real. Because if you've had long held beliefs about your incompetence of some social or professional or performance type of situation, it's important to write down the accomplishments, to really start to self-assess and take the baby steps. Don't focus on all the things you've done perfectly, but think about the things that you've done reasonably well. Reward yourself for some of those, and make sure that you're taking steps to gathering what thoughts are rational and what's irrational. Does it make sense to think you're a fraud given everything that you know and everything you've been through and all of the skills that you've developed? And maybe it's time to stop comparing yourself to others, whether it's on social media or in real life, because no matter what, you will always find fault with yourself when you're comparing your journey with someone else's, and that will fuel the feelings of not being good enough or not belonging. I mean, look, we all know that social media has brought out so many feelings of inferiority, judgment, comparison. So if you're trying to portray an image on social media that doesn't match who you are, or that's impossible to achieve, of course, you're going to feel more like a fraud. Showing up authentically is going to squash a lot of those feelings, and being okay with who you are and frankly, who you're not is the path to self-love, self-acceptance, and not feeling like a fraud. And look, no matter how much imposter syndrome creeps up, refuse to let it hold you back. Unless you're being a fraud, then of course I will encourage you to stop it immediately. But if you're not and you just feel like one, don't let that feeling stop you from pursuing your goals. Keep going, refuse to be stopped, and develop the strategies to cope with these feelings by talking about what you're experiencing, questioning those negative thoughts, and of course, avoiding comparing yourself to others. And look, no matter what, there is no shame, there is no guilt. So many people experience symptoms of this at some time in their life, unless they're trying to stay exactly in the same place. But when you're growing and you're striving and you're doing new things and you're learning new things, it's important to remember that perceptions do not always reflect reality. All right, guys, thanks so much for tuning in to another episode. And if you love this episode, I'm asking you for one huge favor. Share it. Tag me on social at Candy Valentino, or if you thought of someone during this episode who might benefit from the content, text it to them, send it to them. Make sure that you are tagging your friends in the comments if you see it on social. I would be so grateful if we could get this out into more hands, more ears, and to more people in the world. Okay, that's it for today. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time on Generation Wealth.